What's going on, everybody? Kalipus Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, I'm going to be giving you my full review of the Motorola Moto G Stylus 5G 2023 and going over everything you need to know about it to help you decide whether or not it's the right phone for you. Now, as always, if you end up wanting to learn more about this phone, be sure to check out the description where I am linking to several other videos about it, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. So with the Moto G Stylus 5G 2023, we're getting a 6.6-inch 120Hz IPS LCD display with a 1080p resolution, a PPI of 399, and a 20:9 aspect ratio. So in general, this is definitely a great display. I will say compared to its predecessor, the Moto G Stylus 5G 2022, it is a little bit smaller, but honestly, if you haven't seen that phone, it doesn't really make a huge difference. I still do think for what it is decently large. And if you're doing something like watching videos, playing games, that kind of stuff, you will get a pretty good experience no matter what. But of course, if you want the largest display you can get for the money, then you might want to get the 2022 instead. But again, I feel like at 6.6 inches, despite being really barely over average, it is still decently large, so for most people, you will get a good experience. Aside from the size, with the 20:9 aspect ratio, we are getting a decently tall and narrow form factor. So if you're in landscape mode doing stuff like watching videos or looking at photos, you're going to get a nice immersive experience. Things are going to be a bit more cinematic when you go into a full screen mode. And if you're doing something vertical like browsing the web or using social media, with a form factor like this, you can fit a good amount of content on the screen without having to scroll too much. So overall, I do think the form factor here is really good. In addition to this, with the 1080p resolution, the image is nice and sharp. So for stuff like playing games and watching videos, things are going to look real good. And despite having an IPS LCD, which honestly, compared to something like an AMOLED or an OLED, is really nothing special. The colors still look really good, the display is decently bright, and for what it is, the viewing angles are actually pretty decent. But I will say, if you're outside in really bright sunlight or any kind of area like that where things are a bit brighter, compared to something like an AMOLED, this display might be a bit more difficult to see. But in general, I feel like for what it is, if you are looking for an affordable 5G phone that has a really nice display for everyday use, you really won't be disappointed here. And with the 120Hz refresh rate, really just icing on the cake here. But with this kind of refresh rate, compared to a standard 60Hz display, in general the movement on the screen is a bit faster and smoother, making the phone feel more premium to use. Now for storage, keep in mind the phone in my hand is factory unlocked, and it does have 256GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, but if you get this phone from a carrier like Cricket for example, most likely you will get 128 instead. But for this phone in my hand at least, 256GB is definitely a lot of storage, especially considering factory unlocked at full price. It's going for around $399, so for being a more affordable device, the storage is really impressive. For the average user, you're most likely not gonna ever have to worry about running out of space. And even if you do, maybe you're recording lots of longer videos, for example, that tend to take up a bit more space. Again, remember this phone does support microSD card expansion, so you can increase the storage quite a bit. And even with the carrier version with 128, for the average user, you're probably not going to run out of space there either. So in general, if you are looking for a more affordable phone that has plenty of storage, this phone will be a great choice. For security features, with the Moto G Stylus 5G 2023, this phone does have face unlock and a fingerprint scanner right here on the power key. So definitely nice to get both options here. Not that it's really uncommon or anything, but real quick, let's give the fingerprint scanner a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see, real fast and responsive, no issues at all. And again, remember this phone does have face unlock too, so if you want to use that instead, you always can. Taking a look at the camera setup with the Moto G Stylus 5G 2023, up front, we got a real nice looking hole punch design for the selfie camera. This camera is 16 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a dual camera setup with a 50 megapixel main camera and an 8 megapixel ultra wide camera that also doubles as a macro camera. So definitely a great camera setup here, despite only having two cameras as opposed to like a triple or a quad camera setup. The features compared to other mid-range phones like that are pretty much the same. In case you're wondering, in addition to combining the ultra wide camera and macro camera into one, which I do think is pretty cool, the depth sensing camera is pretty much built into the main camera too, kind of like most higher end devices. So despite not having a dedicated one, portrait mode still works really well. Now to give you an idea of what this camera can do, here's some pictures taken with the Moto G Stylus 5G 2023. Of course, if you're comparing it to a much higher end device, in that kind of situation, it's kind of debatable on whether or not this phone will be more of an upgrade or a downgrade. But in general, for what it is compared to most mid-range phones like this, for everyday use if you're doing stuff like Instagram, Snapchat, sending photos to friends and family, or maybe taking like vacation photos for your own memories, for that kind of use, I do think it will get the job done just fine. And for most people, you probably don't need to spend spend a bunch of money on a super high-end device, you can easily just get something more affordable like this, and again, for most people, it will get the job done just fine. And also keep in mind for video, despite only having a max recording quality of 1080p in the front camera, the Moto G Stylus 5G can actually record 4K videos in the rear, so definitely a great feature to have. I haven't seen a Moto G Stylus phone that can record 4K videos since 2021, and even then that was only the 4G version for some reason. And while I feel like the average user probably doesn't really care that much about recording 4K videos, it is always a nice option to have. Now for the RAM and processor, with this phone, we are getting 6GB of RAM with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 6 Gen 1 processor. So not only is this processor brand new, in fact this is probably the first phone that actually has it, but overall it is a really good processor, and for a mid-range phone, I have overall been impressed with the performance here. Now of course, on one hand, if you're comparing this to a much higher end device, again if you're coming from an older flagship phone, depending on how old it might feel like a bit of a downgrade, but for a mid-range phone, as long as you don't have super high expectations, no matter what you're doing on it, I do think most people will have a pretty good experience here. For stuff like web browsing, social media, streaming content like videos and music, and even some light mobile gaming, it will get the job done just fine. And even if you're doing maybe moderately higher performance mobile gaming, I have done stuff like Call of Duty, for example, and it gets the job done. So for that kind of stuff, for things most people are typically using their smartphones for on a daily basis, it will be perfectly fine. But just keep in mind if you're a bit more of a power user, if you're constantly doing stuff like high performance mobile gaming or maybe like video editing or something like that, then in that case you might want to spend a bit more and get something higher end that's quite a bit faster, but I feel like that's definitely not most people. So in your typical situation, the performance we get with this phone will be plenty good enough. Now I ran a benchmark test on this phone using Geekbench 6, and here are the results I got. So what I recommend doing is running this test on your current phone, and then comparing your results to these, and that's going to give you a better idea of where this phone stands performance-wise compared to your current device, because of course, again, depending on what you're coming from, it may or may not actually be an upgrade. But again, I feel like for most people, for a mid-range phone, the performance we're getting here is really good, so most likely you won't be disappointed. For the battery, with the Moto G Stylus 5G 2023, we are getting a 5000 mAh battery, so not really anything new here. And it does support 20W fast charging too. So in general, definitely a great battery. Again, not really anything new. I feel like at this point in 2023, pretty much every mid-range phone in this price range is gonna have basically the same battery. But I will say, even for what it is, like you might expect from a Motorola phone, the battery life here is really good. So if you are looking for a phone that's really gonna last all day without having to charge every 20 minutes, you're definitely not gonna go wrong with this phone. And when it comes to charging speed, 20W fast charging is not the best, but I feel like for most people it will still be perfectly fine. Just keep in mind, if you do want to fully utilize the fast charging, you will need a 20W charger, which this phone doesn't come with. And in case you're wondering, no, this phone does not have wireless charging. The vast majority of mid-range phones don't, but if you are coming from an older, higher end device that does, keep in mind, even at this point in 2023, wireless charging is still mostly a feature you're only going to find in flagship phones. For the software, the Moto G Stylus 5G does have Android 13, so definitely great there. But when it comes to long-term software support, sure, on one hand, I feel like eventually this phone will get Android 14 after it comes out, but for Motorola, at this point at least, major updates seem to be a little unpredictable. So if you're someone who wants to keep your phone for multiple years and still get the latest version of Android, you might want to go with something like a Samsung or a Google phone. But if you just want the latest version of Android and long-term updates are really not that important to you, then again, this phone does at least have Android 13, so in that case, it should be perfectly fine. When it comes to other features, the Moto G Stylus 5G does have NFC, so if you like to use tap and pay, then keep in mind, you can use that with this phone, no problem. And in addition to this, when it comes to the phone's speaker, it does actually have stereo audio, meaning if you're doing something like watching a video, for example, sound comes out of both the main speaker and the earpiece, giving you a much more immersive experience. So if you are someone who likes to maybe watch videos or listen to music without headphones, then this is definitely going to be a great thing for you. In addition to this, the Moto G Stylus 5G 2023 does actually have a headphone jack. Hopefully Motorola doesn't take this feature away anytime soon, but just keep in mind, if you have a normal pair of wired headphones, you don't need an adapter for this phone. And then of course, as the name implies, the Moto G Stylus 5G does in fact have a stylus, and in general compared to its predecessor, not that the difference is really huge or anything, but I do think it is a little bit better. It feels a bit more realistic and responsive, and again, it's not really a huge difference, and if you compare this to something like the Samsung Galaxy S23 Ultra, or even one of the older but higher end Samsung Galaxy Note phones, it's definitely not going to be that good. But if you're just doing stuff like taking handwritten notes and maybe browsing through your display or something like that, it will get the job done just fine. And compared to something like maybe if you're using Metro, there's the TCL Stylus 5G. I do think this phone's stylus is quite a bit better than that. So in general, if you're looking for a phone that has a stylus but you don't want to spend $1,400 on your phone, then definitely a great alternative here. Now taking a look at the overall design, it is pretty simple and straightforward like most Moto G phones are nowadays. The phone is, I think, made entirely of plastic. It really feels like plastic, so I'm just assuming here. But despite this, it still does feel sturdy. The build quality is good. On the left side here, we got kind of a glossy finish on the frame. There's the slot for the SIM card and the micro SD card. On the right, we got the power key. Again, this is also where the fingerprint scanner is. Volume down, volume up. On the back, we got the camera module, flash. We got a nice kind of metallic finish here. You can't really see fingerprints too badly, so definitely nice there. On the bottom, again, there's the headphone jack, USB-C port, microphone, speaker, and the stylus. On the top, there's nothing but the noise canceling microphone, and that's really pretty much it. Another thing I do want to point out here is that despite being made of plastic, the phone does have a decent amount of weight to it, so in general, despite not being the most premium device ever, the overall quality here definitely feels good. But in conclusion, my general thoughts about the Motorola Moto G Stylus 5G 2023. Overall, I feel like compared to its predecessor, the differences are definitely more on the subtle side. It is a little bit smaller, so make of that what you will. I know a lot of people are kind of getting tired of having super large displays, so it might actually be a good thing, but if you are looking for something like the Moto G Stylus 5G 2022 that was really large at 6.8 inches, then you might be a bit disappointed. I personally feel like it's really a preference thing. There's no objective right or wrong there, but I do think all the same, the display is pretty good here. The phone also has a ton of storage, which to be fair, I kind of expected, but in general, for something like storage, you're definitely not going to go wrong with the Moto G Stylus phone. They do tend to be pretty good. The camera was also especially impressive, mostly because it can record 4K videos, which again, that is a feature I'm glad they brought back. And I do think the photo quality here was really good too. But a couple things about this phone that really did stand out to me are, first of all, with the Snapdragon 6 Gen 1 processor, the performance is really good. So despite not being quite flagship level, if you are looking for a super fast mid-range phone, you're definitely not going to go wrong here. And in addition to this, despite having a really fast processor, a great camera that can actually record 4K videos, a really nice, pretty premium display, a great battery, tons of storage, and just being a higher quality device in general. Despite all this, even at full price factory unlocked, this phone is only going for around $399. And sure, if you're looking for the cheapest, most affordable phone you can possibly get, you can definitely do better. I mean, you can get a $200 phone that's perfectly fine for daily activities, but I feel like for what it offers, this is a really affordable phone. So in general, if you are looking for an affordable 5G phone that has a stylus, a great processor, a really good display, plenty of storage, a great camera, and really everything you could possibly expect from a mid-range phone, all while being reasonably affordable, then you definitely won't go wrong with this phone. But this concludes my review of the Motorola Moto G Stylus 5G 2023. Again, if you want to learn more about this phone, definitely check out the description, where I am linking to several other videos about it, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipis Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.